everyone. Good to see you all. Oops. Trond is one title behind on me. We're just in the process of launching a new MIT-wide initiative on cybersecurity and internet policy. And I want to talk with you about the work that we're going to be doing. That's work that's obviously going to be grounded in the engineering expertise that we have across MIT, but also work very much to bring into the discussion social science, our colleagues from the Sloan School, anthropologists, sociologists, economists, the broad range of disciplines that we really are going to need to understand these issues. And what I want to talk with you about briefly today is just why is it that we even care about studying these issues? You can understand why you want to build systems that are more secure. But the question that we're looking at is one level above that. How do we structure our society? How do we structure our legal system? How do we structure our institutions so that we actually produce and operate systems in a more trustworthy manner? And what I want to suggest to you is that we're at a point of very unique tension in our information society, in our information economy. We have a pretty complicated culture gap right now where we're simultaneously living in a world that is increasingly transparent, where we know more and more, but somehow we trust less and less. We're in a world where users are used to having more and more control over certain aspects of the personal data. We have George mentioned his travels this morning, where there's lots of data available to him about what's going on, and there's lots of data probably available about his health status as he's tumbling through the waves or whatever else he's doing. But at the same time, we have less and less control over data that others have about us. And finally, in our political process, in our policy-making process, we're increasingly concerned about many of the threats that George talked about. But I would suggest to you, we're much better at understanding pinpoint threats that we see here, there, or anywhere else. We see more and more of them. But I'd say we know less and less, relatively speaking, about how those threats emerge and about what steps we can take to really manage them. So all this adds up to what we think is actually declining trust in the internet environment. Why does that matter? Why does that matter to businesses? Why does that create opportunities for startups that may be here? Because when people don't trust infrastructure, they're less likely to use it. The big traditional infrastructure providers that we're familiar with, the telecommunications companies, the big iron computer companies, have always worked very hard to maintain public trust. But when we've had over the last couple of years all the revelations from Snowden and the suggestion that the NSA may be getting inside of critical systems operated by United States companies, what happens? A bunch of German companies led by Deutsche Telekom and a couple others mentioned here, say, now you should buy your email made in Germany. Don't trust these services that might be vulnerable to the United States. Trust us instead. It now may be coming out that they may not be all that trustworthy, but we saw for, I think, the first time, a real market shift that said because of what was a relatively obscure public policy change that the NSA is maybe collecting a little too much data, all of a sudden businesses, cloud services businesses from Google, from Microsoft, from Amazon and from others, all of a sudden felt a real risk in the market and have scrambled around to try to find ways to secure to reestablish the trust with their users. Here's one thing that we know from a study that we've done. We've been following, I shouldn't say following, we've been respectfully observing smartphone users to try to understand what their behaviors are as to certain kinds of privacy conditions. And we found one very sort of unusual result. Cell phone users, smartphone users, people who use smartphone apps will give more personal data to those apps as long as they don't know very much about what those apps are doing. The more they know about the purpose of the data, the less data they disclose. But the more they trust the organization overall, they trust the source of the app, the more data they'll give. So in a world where we've tried to build privacy trust with increasingly long privacy policies, someone counted up and realized that there are more words in all of the Apple privacy policies than there are in Hamlet. We clearly need a different direction. As I said, you know, we think a lot about Snowden when we think about privacy and security these days, but Snowden's really just part of a larger trend where information, our institutions are so porous that we're going to be in a world where more and more data, whether it's from governments or from corporations or even universities, are just going to be dumped out, and there's going to be this kind of radical transparency happening. But at the same time, that does not seem to increase trust. If anything, it seems to decrease trust. To me, one of the most striking statements made during the whole course of the Snowden disclosures was from the federal judge who's responsible for overseeing the NSA. Some people think the NSA has no oversight whatsoever. That's not true. There's actually a court. It's admittedly a secret court that over less than ideal, that oversees the NSA's intelligence gathering activities. And the chief judge, who's a very distinguished federal judge with years of experience, said that he has no idea whether, when he issues an order to the NSA to say you can do this or you can't do that or you must take these steps, he has no idea whether they're following his order. So how are you supposed to trust that? At the same time, at the other end of the spectrum, at the kind of microscopic, bit-by-bit end of the spectrum, we're all experiencing more and more control over our data. Our data is more visible to us. It's in the form of watches and little devices and smartphones and whatnot. And so we actually have an expectation shaped by our devices, by the apps that we use, that we'll be able to have complete control over everything at our fingertips. But at the same time, people are also becoming increasingly aware that there's more and more powerful analytic capabilities being deployed using the data about us to make decisions about us. We understand perfectly well that there are a couple of big financial credit bureaus out there that may make assessments of our creditworthiness. We sort of understand how that happens. But what we probably, and we understand they kind of look through, are we paying our bills on time or not? And that seems reasonably fair and understandable. But what we don't understand is that those organizations and lots of startups in this space, fascinating one, Zest Finance, is using very advanced machine learning approaches to look at a whole variety of data about our just day-to-day activities, not our financial activities, but just what websites we visit, what color socks we buy, all kinds of things, and are finding correlations, which may be entirely incidental, between activities that we are involved in that seem innocuous and assessments, for example, of whether we're a good credit risk or not. So this is a process that happens completely behind closed doors in a black box, and we have no understanding at this point of how to have any visibility into it. The White House became concerned about this in some ways in reaction to Snowden, and began a process of looking at public policy issues related to big data, focusing on privacy. They came up here, actually asked us to organize a workshop for them to inform their policy process. We did that about a year ago. And one of the, I think, really important findings that the White House process came to was that people are worried that they're being discriminated against based on all this data that's collected about them, that these big data processes that we all think are valuable and cool may also result in making determinations about individuals in an opaque way, and may be able to discern from incidental activities very sensitive facts about us, such as what our religious persuasion is or what our race is, and use that sort of information that is in individual pieces innocuous, but in the large, potentially quite harmful. So what do we do about this? The White House, in its assessment of this problem, recommended that we need systems that have properties of greater accountability. That we ought to be able to look at how data actually flows through systems and assess whether it's being used according to a set of rules. Has someone scraped up a bunch of data that I think is sort of innocuous about me and used it to make a decision that actually has consequence? That my mortgage rate's going to be higher, that I'm not going to get health insurance, that I don't get admitted to a school I want to go to, whatever it happens to be. So what is an accountable system? In very simple terms, think of the analogy with financial accounting. Not the sexiest thing in the world, but our economic world runs based on a pretty simple set of accounting rules that tells us where the money is. Tells us whether institutions are using the money correctly, whether they have any money, whether they're spending too much, whether they're spending it properly, whether they're earning the right amount of return. We make investment decisions based on these accounting rules. We make lending decisions. We do all kinds of things. We decide whether we can afford to go to war based on these rules. And we, in the end, tend to trust our institutions, at least enough to give them lots of our money, because we have these stable accounting rules in place. Well, what we've suggested is that we need what we call personal information accountability. Instead of a financial balance sheet, we need a personal information balance sheet. We need to be able to know at every step what's happening with our information that's in these big, opaque systems, and that the source of trust in our information environment is going to come when we can have the same level of accountability that we have for money for our personal information. Over the last 8-9 years, we've been doing research on this. We've built systems that allow us to look at the flow of data and assess it. This is a research prototype, not a well-designed UI. But it allows us to look at actual transactions as to personal data, match them up against rules that we express in a machine-readable policy language, and figure out whether the institution in question is doing the right thing with the data. Here's a somewhat prettier version of this same kind of system from our company, TrustLayers. My co-founder, Adam Tovim, is here. And we've taken this accountable systems technology and are applying it in law enforcement context. We're applying it in financial services context. We're applying it in healthcare context. This is a system which is actually sitting on top of the Palantir data analytics platform. And the analyst is making all kinds of determinations about individuals. The question is the analyst using the data properly? Is the analyst following the law, following the internal rules about how that data is being used? And our system is able to make a determination and provide guidance. We're also able to provide what I called before a personal information balance sheet that gives a summary of potentially a publicly available overview of how the institution is managing with respect to the trustworthiness of its data usage. Just like the way an institution can publish a financial balance sheet as a way to attest to its financial status. I want to just talk about one final research topic that we're particularly concerned about in the quest to have more trustworthy systems in our world. Some of you, who remembers the Stop Online Piracy debate? Oh, you guys are such a geeky group. Wow, okay, all right. So a couple of years ago, as it happens when I was sitting in the White House, there was a proposal to use the domain name system as a way to block access to websites that were outside the United States and were purveying illegal content, that is, content that was violating United States intellectual property laws. It's a genuine problem in the physical world. If we're worried that there are goods or services that are being offered outside being developed outside the U.S., violating U.S. copyright or other intellectual property rules, and are being shipped into the U.S., then of course we can stop them at the border and say, you know, you can't sell those things in the United States. In the internet, we don't exactly have borders. That's mostly a good thing, but it does create this sort of problem. There was a proposal that seemed innocuous to use the domain name system to block or kind of obscure access to these websites that were found to be purveying illegal content. And it seemed like a very innocent thing, but a number of internet activists and later a group of very highly respected engineers, including some of my colleagues here at MIT, said, if you pass this bill, you will break the internet. And can anyone imagine what it would mean to break the internet? Like, can you just what would that, how would you know the internet is broken? Like, you know, probably your little part of the internet gets broken every once in a while or gets slow or whatever, and you kick your router or turn the switch on and off or use your cell phone instead or whatever it is. But we had this bizarre situation, and I was on the receiving end of this, sitting in the White House having to make decisions about it, and all these people said, if you pass this law, it will break the internet. And we had these very smart engineers who wrote to us and said that we would fragment the domain name system, and somehow, if we use the domain name system in this way, internet users would give up on using the current domain name system and go create their own. And that would be the way they would find all these foreign sites. And what these engineers were worried about was that if a large number of users migrated to some alternative domain name system, that we would balkanize the internet, we would destabilize it, and it might, quote, break. I found this very awkward because we were being presented with a highly alarming prospect that some kind of innocuous law was going to break the internet, which we really didn't want to do. No one wants to say, well, President Obama's the guy who broke the internet. So we had to figure this out, and in the end, we did it candidly somewhat by feel. Normally, in a mature public policy debate, if, for example, someone says, well, we've got to stop X, Y, and Z environmental practices because they're polluting too much, you can actually put some numbers and some models on that and say, well, if we continue to use coal of a certain type, it'll introduce X number of kilotons of carbon into the atmosphere, and that will have some effect on the average temperature in the world. And you can argue about the details of that, but at least there's a model and there's some data, and you can talk about it in a mature way. We don't say stop burning coal, or otherwise we'll break the planet. I mean, some people might say that, but that's not the way we have a policy debate. It might be true, but but we can at least talk about how badly we're breaking the planet. and our goal, in many ways, in this new cybersecurity policy research initiative, is to understand enough about the dynamics of systems like the internet at large scale so that we can understand how badly we're going to break it if we do X, Y, or Z thing. So these are some of the folks involved. Again, we have people from across the social science, engineering, and management schools. The thing I'm actually most excited about this initiative, and I'll have just two more sentences. What I'm most excited about is that we have a growing number of students who are showing up in all different departments at all different levels, and they really want to learn about how to apply the extraordinary technical skills that they mostly arrive at MIT with, and we help them sort of buff up a little. That they want to learn how to take those technical skills and apply them to real-world public policy problems, to be able to provide guidance to policymakers, and to be able to build systems that solve real public policy problems. So I will stop there and look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much.